There, no, that's a reflection.
The little screens aren't working.
Are they on?
Yep.
Maybe try turning it
It's
on.
a little credit.
Yep, multiple times. All right. Well, it's 6:30, so I'll call this regular meeting of the Sturgis Common Council to order, September 5th, 2023, day after Labor Day. First item is approval of the agenda.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve.
Got a first by Dean,
Second.
second by Angela. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by stating yes.
Yes.
Opposed to no. We've got an agenda. Please stand or move cover and join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Item 4 is informational reports. With tonight, we don't have anything under those. Item 5 is announcements and praise. I'd like to take a moment and pray if you'd like to join me. Heavenly Father, thank you for the ability to come to you in prayer and just for your love that you showed us through your Son, Jesus Christ. May we keep that in perspective as we operate in this world and understand we're all broken, and we know our Savior is the reason it all happens. So in your name I pray. Amen. Items, Whip, I got a couple of notes here. Off-road rally this week, starting tomorrow already, since today's Tuesday. Usually brings the rain, but it looks like we will have some open skies for sure. Wanted just to mention a lot of activities going on in the community with flag football, and there's still some softball leagues I believe Rod has going out there. And even though we're in the fall, it's still a full bore for activities and organization and scheduling. So. Does council have anything to add to announcements and praise?
Say a thank you to the folks that contributed to the shoot-away machine.
You bet.
Yep, we have it up there on the screen.
You better come to the microphone, Deb.
Okay.
Or switch the microphone over to you just from where you're sitting there.
So we tested out this new machine today. It's called a shoot-away, the gun by shoot-away, actually. And there were local groups and businesses who contributed to that. We have the Pioneer Bank and Trust, the Gus Forbes Memorial, and Scooper Basketball Club, and Key City Chiropractic and Acupuncture, and D-Tie Vet Supply. The machine cost $8,000, and they actually have one like it at the high school, but that is just for high school kids, and this one will be available to the youth, and it'll be stored at the community center, or not the community center, at the armory, and the coaches just need to call the community center to book the machine to help their kids become better shooters.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks,
I noticed
Deb.
it worked on Lisa. Man, she was nailing those shots.
Anything else for announcements and praise? Yep, come on up, Rick.
Starting tomorrow morning, we're going to be starting our construction project, the installation of that ADA swing and that area and the bike path that goes around it. So we'll have some construction down there. Likely will last 3 or 4 weeks. So
Appreciate that and look forward to that project.
And we'll be doing, starting on Sunday, the water will be off at the community center. We'll be starting that water replacement, that water main replacement project as well. And that's anticipated to take 3 weeks. The center will be open,
Right.
but it won't have
The pool.
bathrooms, pool, or locker room facilities available. So,
Has to be done.
yes.
Anything else under announcements and praise? City managers report by transition team. First one is sales tax report for June, and I'll turn it over to you, Faye.
Thank you, Mayor. Sales in the month of June of 2023 were 10.36% higher than June of 2022. Sales for the first 6 months of 2023 were 7.23 higher than the same period in 2022. Our tourism or triple B sales tax, the sales for the first, for the month of June of 2023, these tourism-related sales were 21.98% higher than June of 2022. Sales for the first 6 months of 2023 was 16.23 higher than the same period in 2022. There was some typos there, but I did get them corrected.
I appreciate that extra bit of data about the actual sales versus just the sales tax. That hasn't always been discussed publicly before, but I think with inflation and everything, it helps keep it all in perspective. But we're still having rising sales, which is good.
Correct.
And with 0.3, or ours is always the same for sales tax, the states where the 0.3 comes from with reduction. Questions for Faye on those basically second quarter financials for sales tax? Next ones are payroll, so Lisa's moving forward.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, for some payroll changes, we do basically have our seasonal referees. This is mainly for our adult softball league. We are replacing the opener at the front desk. So that's Laura, and that's all I have are those one part-time and several seasonal.
Questions for Lisa? Appreciate the input. Item 7 is consent calendar. 7.1 is consider it. We got minutes at 7.2 and setting a public hearing for later this month. Does council wish to remove any of those items and discuss them individually? How about anybody in the public of the 3 items? Is there a motion?
So moved.
Got a first by Preston to approve the whole consent calendar.
Yes, sir.
Second.
Second by Aaron. Any last discussion? We do have minutes, so we'll go ahead and roll call. Preston, we'll start with you.
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Becca.
Yes.
I'm yes. Angela,
Yes.
Kevin,
Yes.
Tony,
Yes.
and Mike.
Yes.
Consent calendar is approved. Item 8 is claims. There is a couple of additions I'd like to bring forward to add tonight. One of them is for Lori Kirk for catering for the rally. It's a total of $17,171.95. That's employee breakfast, employee lunches from Friday till the next Saturday. And there's also a request from the rallying events to include on these claims half for Randy McAllister for Music Fest deposit. He requires that in his contract, and it's $12.50. So if someone is willing to make a motion after with those additions, that is what is requested.
I've got a question about the claim under rallying events. Am I on? Rallying events for wages. Wages for the PAL group. Can somebody tell me what that's about?
So the PAL group is the ones that take one of our motorcycles in our inventory, and then they do the raffle for it. The agreement they had with the city was that they would, they basically buy the bike from us, and then we pay the supplies needed to create the tickets and sell the tickets, and then they keep the proceeds above the cost of that bike and minus those things. So we're just basically paying the wages for the staff that sold the tickets.
So we put them on the city employment roll?
Nope, they are actually paid through PAL. So we're just reimbursing PAL. It's an invoice from that nonprofit organization.
It shows as
Labor.
labor, and
But that's basically what the invoice is for. But they are actually, it's an invoice, so it's basically like we do with our community grant with them as well. They pay our labor for a police department, so they just invoice us for that total amount.
okay. Additionally, there's a claim for the item that we're talking about later in the meeting for the ATF visit, or AFT. Shouldn't that be after our discussion?
It can certainly be pulled off.
And so I guess I would make a motion to approve the additions of the catering and the Randy McAllister deposit and all the claims minus the AFT claim to be reconsidered after the report that we listened to.
So we got a first by Kevin.
Second.
We got a second by Becca. Any further discussions on the claims? Public or council? None being heard. All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by stating yes.
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 Opposed to no.
Abstain.
Well, let's go ahead and roll call it for clarity. We'll start with you, Mike.
Yes.
Tony,
Abstain.
Kevin,
Yes.
Angela.
Yes.
Yes. Becca,
Yes.
Dean,
Yes.
Aaron,
Yes.
and Preston.
Yes.
Bills are paid with 2 additions and 1 to be reconsidered later. Item 9 is reports. 9.1 is the TAP grant application. Mr. Bush has got this staff report for us.
Evening, Mayor, members of the council. Up for your consideration tonight is a resolution. I need a resolution and a copy of the minutes to be submitted for our Transportation Alternative Grant. Basically, the Transportation Alternative Grant is a program that uses federal transportation funds designated by Congress for specific activities that enhance the intermodal transportation system and provide a safe alternative transportation option. TA encompasses a variety of smaller scale, non-motorized transportation projects such as pedestrian and bicycle facilities, recreation trails, safe routes to school projects, community improvements such as historic preservation and vegetation management, and environmental mitigation related to stormwater and habitat connectivity. Approximately $9 million is available annually for the TA grants in South Dakota. That's what we have submitted our application for, and part of the requirement of the application is this resolution by the governing body and the minutes showing that the governing body supports this grant. This is the same grant that we've been successful in getting both for Vanacker and for the Highway 14A bike path extensions, and this resolution is for the Moose Drive one, which will connect from Dolan Creek on the north and traverse south and connect into our existing bike path down on Otter Road. If anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Hey, Rick, I do have a question. I thought that grant was for 600,000.
It is.
Okay. It says here the grant amount will be 384,100 on the.
No, it should be $600,000. I don't know what that's an error.
But in the resolution it says 600 though, does it? Or
I don't think it states, it's just a resolution of acknowledgement. But you're right, the grant for that particular bike path is $600,000 and the city pays 20% of that.
okay. Thanks, Rick.
Sorry.
20% above the
No,
600,000 or
20% of that. The maximum is $600,000 that any community can submit for.
Basically,
Gotcha.
to get to 600,000, we need to have 120,000
Correct.
to be able to get that 600,000.
I guess I'd like to just make sure that we understand that that's a transportation infrastructure and not recreation infrastructure as well. Just a statement.
It can be used for both. The grant can be.
Any other discussion? Questions? Any public input? Is there a motion?
I'll motion.
Second.
Got a first by Aaron and a second by Kevin. Any last discussion? All those in favor of the motion to approve the resolution, please indicate by stating yes.
Yes.
Opposed to no. That motion carries. Thanks, Rick.
Thank you.
9.2 is to consider first reading of the 2024 budget, appropriations for next year. Faye, I'll turn it over to you.
Adam sent out quite a bit of paperwork this right around noon today. He had went through the questions that had been asked by Kevin. I guess just to start, is there any questions that you want us to answer or go through more thoroughly? Adam's going to be doing that part of it. If you want me to discuss more of the unexpended budget on 2022, I will take care of that. Or if you want to discuss the growth or the preliminary assessed value and the property tax, if we're going to make any changes to that. So I guess that's what we need to discuss mainly, is the changes and then any questions on Kevin's worksheet.
Faye, why don't you speak to the question of the unexpended 2022s?
Okay. So in 2022, I'd given you a report that showed that there was 1.4 million, well, and it's also on Casal, 1.4 million, almost 1.5 million left over. So there is actually four departments. Police department had a supplement for 108,741. That was for their COPS grant and Pell grant. Now that isn't a true supplement. That is something that they get no matter what. So it was done by a resolution. It was not done by an ordinance, but that money was put into their department because they had spent that money on wages for that. And so with that, they still had leftover was 45,169. So that should be subtracted out of that 1,492,000. Streets. There was a supplement done for that. That was banner poles, and that supplement was 783,409. So, or excuse me, yeah, the supplement was that. They had left over 592,000. So that was to go to the banner poles for 2023. Mayor and council, we had that supplement for $1.5 million for the Richards property. There was 117,000 left in that, which of course 80,000 is that contingency. And then parks, there was $150,000 supplement, but that was for the ADA park equipment, and that and so that did not get done until 2023. So basically, if you figure that up, it's about 543,000 that we had left over.
Unexpended cash.
Correct.
And for clarity, when you said that was supplemented, that means appropriated for the 2022 budget, didn't get paid in full to some degree, supplemented for the 23 budget because it didn't have a line item there. It was carried over, and then that's how it was paid for and
Yeah, it got
complete.
supplemented in 2022, but it didn't get spent until
Right.
2023.
Why do we make those supplements if we don't make the expenditures?
Because we really truly think that we're going to do those projects. Rick can speak to that. He knows how much projects, not to throw you under the, but projects need to be, we think we're going to get them done, but
Yeah, so like the bike or the banner pole project, for example, that project was bid and let in 2022 and had an active contract. The final completion date wasn't until 2023. At that point in time, once we issue the contract and they get the notice to proceed, they're able to start working. So we try to have the money available to make those payments. that particular project, they decided for whatever reason to defer and get it done in the spring of 2023, is why we had that. The project that I spoke of earlier in the park, the ADA swing, it just took us that long to get the project put together. It was a fairly long lead time on getting the swing. Those swings are not like a on the shelf. They actually make them for us. We choose the colors to match our existing playground equipment down there. So there's a fairly long lead time on that. If you remember when that money was set forth, where there was a group of individuals that came to a council meeting one night, and that's how that money got set aside. And at that point in time, it was just for ADA improvements. So we had to go through the park board and a couple of different, we didn't even know what we were going to do, what the project was. And we had we put out a bunch of different projects in different parks. And then it came back to narrow it down to that we wanted to make these in the city park, and then trying to find the right place for it and the configuration. It just took much longer. I don't think there was any thought that it would be done in 2022, but at the time that the council gave staff direction to set aside $150,000 to make these improvements, we just added that into the next time that there was a supplemental reading done. Right or wrong, I guess that's just how it happened.
On the banner poles, we actually did spend money on that for engineering and
Right.
stuff of like $29,000
In 22.
in 22.
22. I understand how that rolls for sure. It seems like though we're doing the supplements before we need to, and that's tying our funds up.
Sure.
Putting those in those budgets and not making them available other places. Seems like other government entities make those supplements when the budgets actually need that, and typically the end of the year, one time.
I think the way that this was done was because that was a certain amount of money allocated. You wouldn't want to not make it and spend it somewhere else and then have the contractor submit a bill for the banner poles, for example, and not have the money to pay them. So I think that amount of the contract is just basically set aside, earmarked, is why we're doing it. Why we moved it into the streets, I don't know, that's an accounting, but that's why, was so that money was there. It wouldn't be fair to take money out of our snow removal budget, for example, to pay for banner poles when it was a capital project that had a specific amount of money. Same thing with the swing. It wasn't a parks budgeted project, but it was money that was set aside by per direction of the council. And at the time, like I said, we didn't even know what the project was. Then the project developed and we have the money. And I don't believe at the end of the day, we won't spend that whole amount. So there'll be money left over to either do some more ADA upgrades, or it can go back into the general fund or whatever the council deems to do with that.
And you will see another supplement for your banner poles, because it did get paid, built and paid for the streets. We'll have to supplement it again.
My point is I don't think we should be making the supplements until the budgets are burnt down, because in some cases those budgets have lower costs through the year. It appears the rally department is going to be, under their amount, and we funded them with a supplement in January, or pretty early in the year, that maybe we wouldn't have had to have made. And so it's just an overall statement. Thank you, Rick.
I think it's just from my standpoint, it's hard for me. I'm going to try and meet budget, and so if I'm spending for these projects that are unbudgeted out of my budget, I'm going to be cutting other routine items in my budget to try and make budget. I'm not going to wait till the end of the year. I mean, just how we do business, I guess, from my standpoint. And I guess what I'm hearing from you is you want us to burn down our regular operations budget to pay for projects and then supplement at the end of the year. I think that would be a disvalue to the citizens, because naturally we will try and cut things to stay on budget. I monitor my budget on a monthly basis, and if I see that I'm over in areas, we try and make adjustments to what our workflow is to try and regain that. So it'd be very difficult, I guess, on my end to have, like I said, have my budget completely wiped out because of a project and then have an expectation, well, we'll just supplement it at the end of the year. It's easier for me to track my specific line items month by month by month, and not, I know where I'm at 30% or 40% or 50% throughout the year. But if we took a big payment out of there, such as the banner project, that would wipe out a lot of my line items. I wouldn't really know then where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you should not do the projects that you intend to do, but just as the banner poles did not, and the swing did not happen in '22, you could have had other projects that did not happen, making those funds, the supplement not needed until you can get a full picture of where you're at in the fourth quarter. It's maybe a matter of accounting, but it seems like it'd be more efficient than putting money in, taking money out, turning money back, supplementing again and again. And so it's just an overall philosophy. I believe that we should be being a little tighter with our supplements.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think one thing, Faye, for a point of clarity, is kind of the differentiation between cash on hand that's left after a complete budget versus contingency. I mean, the contingency is a line item for an emergency situation, basically, or the council's discretion situation. Cash on hand is what I'd like you to define.
So cash on hand would be, and it would be like for the general fund or for the liquor store or for the wastewater. So what it basically says is at December 31st, because it's cash, whatever cash is left over, that is your cash on hand. So if the general fund has, say, $350,000, that's cash on hand that you can use to take over to your, and the thing is, you're having to guess at what that cash on hand is, because in our budget, there is cash on hand being used to balance the budget. So we're guessing what the cash on hand is at December 31st because we're doing the budget right now. Does that help? If we end up with negative balances at the end of December 31st,
That's where that money
we
would
hope
balance.
not. Then, but that would mess things up. That would mess up then the 2024 budget.
We would definitely need to make sure that we were not in negative balances before the end of the budget year.
Correct.
But in that one pot of money is, using round numbers, 1.4. But as you stated in the report, some of that money was
Not used.
supplemented, exactly, and then there was some still left.
Right.
And that's where some of the gray area of where we're going to be at. But that's where the balance comes from. It doesn't come from hard cash from the savings account, I guess is the point I wanted to make.
I mean, we've always, even in the slimmer years, we always ended up, around, if you remember right, right around $200,000-$300,000, in the slimmer months or slimmer years when we were, yeah.
Adam had some information to share with us.
Did you want me to go?
Yeah, why don't you cover that?
So, in one of the questions, you had a discrepancy with the budget amount for buildings. So you said we were about $20,000 over or underspent in that amount, and so with that, you put $50,000 for supplement. Is actually only 30. I did have an attachment sheet when I sent that out just to show that it's just a typo on your half. So that one is fixed. One of the big ones you said with that question number 2, you said there's a discrepancy of $202,000 between the two sheets that were sent out. And a large chunk of that was that $163,000 in streets. And that was actually a typo on one of the reports sent out. It should have, on the report, it was $873,000. It should have only been, let me find it, $707,000, which is, it would have brought it within $1,500 of the two reports if it wasn't typoed. So that was just a huge error on that part. The rest of it, is just smaller chunks, which it can be broke down just to what we use for what we roll over at the end of the year. So we have a 13th and 14th budget, and all the billing that comes in at the end of the year, comes into January, February, but it's still 2022 billing. And so we roll that back into 2022. And so, we can't finish everything at the end of December, in that fourth quarter. So it's kind of always changing, and that it's adapting. And so it doesn't really change until that final audit and we close the year for good. And so at that point, we're still moving money back into 22 and making those adjustments. We do the same thing with wages that happen in, 2022 but are paid out in 23. And so we make those adjustments, and there's just little, adjustments, and that's kind of where all the $1,500, and you can see, you go through all the line items you had, $2,500 for airport, $1,300 for attorney, $377 for cemetery. You kind of go through all those, and that's where those come from, is just the difference. Just she can't give you an exact amount until, we close out of the budget.
Yeah, thank you. It looked like that $200,000 number was
You should always question.
wonky someplace. And
No,
yeah,
that's
good-
just an error.
just a typo. Yeah,
So-
good work.
Let's see. And that kind of hit most of the questions. I mean, you had on that sheet. Is there anything in particular you were looking at that you?
That was my big question off
Okay.
of the previous data. It was
Perfect.
just that the fourth quarter report didn't seem to balance with the end of year report by a large number. So
Sure. Is there any questions or anything from anyone else who's been looking at any?
I have some items, but I think it's specifically overall for the budget, so I could wait till you're done, Adam, and whatever.
Go ahead, Aaron.
The first one is on the police budget, and it's specifically the tactical response force. I know I talked to Chief about that. I think the Assistant Chief is here. But as I understand, this tactical response force, essentially, if you did have a situation where, somebody was kind of barricaded, it could be an active shooter, any kind of facility, barricade. And, a lot of times there's other communities, Rapid City, I think Spearfish may have something. But to wait sometimes for those assets to mobilize and to deploy, to Sturgis, depending on the situation, you may not always have a lot of time. And currently, we don't really have patrol officers in Sturgis that have the right equipment and training to be able to deal with that situation. Now, I recognize that the probability of this happening each and every day is relatively low, but if it does happen, the severity is pretty high. And I know the initial request was for $17,000 to be able to outfit 6 to 8 patrol officers with the right equipment, and then they can initiate some training. I think they've already done initial coordination with Rapid City to do that. Now, it may take some time to get the right protective equipment and do that training, but I think it would be in our best interest maybe to move forward, get the equipment, do the training, so sometime in the near future, we would have that capability to be able to respond and also provide the best amount of protection in equipment and training for our law enforcement to be able to move with that. It's not a high amount, and I do see there was some. I think we started out at 8,000. I think we're at 12,500 right now. The request from the report that I read from one of the chief sergeants that put this together was for 17,000. So again, I know Faye and I, we've talked about it, and I'm not exactly sure where that comes from, but from a council perspective, I think from a priority perspective, again, just, we all are aware of what's happening across the nation, and sometimes when you have those barricaded situations, you don't always have the time to wait. And so I just think we owe it to the police officers here in town to be able to provide them the right training and equipment to be able to respond to that. So I guess I'll leave that at. Chief, if you want to elaborate, please free to.
And basically, you're asking for consideration of a change of an additional 4,500, right,
Correct.
from the 12,500. Yep.
That's correct.
Go ahead, Ryan.
I would just add what the councilman has already talked about. This is a situation, we could probably go back over the last 12 or 15 months that I've been here. probably found one incident every month that we could have used the special response team. That tactical unit, it requires more training for the officers. We are a young department. We're not trying to hide that from anybody. We have a bunch of new officers who don't have the extensive training that some of our senior officers have. To have a special response team, a tactical unit that could respond is really a priority because we have those instances. I'll go back to March of this year. We did a full-scale exercise where we utilized resources from the air base, and their response was about an hour and 15 minutes. I would guess a rapid city response would probably be 45 minutes to an hour, so we'd shave off 15 minutes. When you're in that situation, the safety of the officers, the safety of the citizens is paramount. There are times where we can't wait 45 minutes. We've been lucky that we've not had anything that happened. I will tell you, my prior two agencies, we joined South Metro SWAT team because we needed it in our bedroom community for Omaha. And then in Yankton, I inherited one. And we used it. It was resources. And there are a number of resources we can utilize for equipment outside of that training equipment. We can buy the shields, but if we don't have proper training on how to operate those shields and how to approach houses, how to clear rooms, some of that stuff is basic, but then there's an additional standard for a special response team. This response team, if it's approved, would be operated under the National Tactical Officers Association, which has a standard that we would have to meet, and that standard is not very low. And we've talked to the department. The officers are well aware of what it would be required on their behalf. Over the last 3 years, probably the last 5 years, the situation on the streets has not been favorable to law enforcement. We've been lucky. We had that situation during the rally. We could have responded to that a little differently. The day before, we could have responded a little differently as well if we would have had a tactical unit there rather than just sending sending lone officers out to search for somebody that's a high-risk offender. And that would not have boded well for anybody if they would have met him one-on-one. So, there's a comfort level from the administrative side, from a law enforcement side. There's a comfort level in having officers equipped for a special response. And they don't deal with just a barricaded subject. There's just a number of different scenarios that we throw at them. Honestly, I think we'd go back 2, 3, maybe 5 years, start looking at situations where we could have used them and thrown those scenarios and say, okay, now build this, train to this. It's a standard that we don't use right now.
Thank you. So I'm not sure how to skin this, but, $4,500 out of general fund or what, but I do think, based on what he just said and just kind of have an understanding of, how you need to kind of protect not only yourself, but as again, the people that you might be, local citizens that may be in that situation. It just seems like that's a small amount of money and, with a high payoff potentially.
So a consideration for a change is
Yes.
of an additional 4,500.
Yep.
So I put that on some notes here. And
Okay.
any other items you had there?
One other item, and first I want to just thank, Faye and Lisa, Adam, Rick. I mean, last week sitting down looking at the capital improvements. I know we're going to talk more of the details at a later time, but the key thing right now, if you look at the projects that we feel we need to do in 2024, we're approximately $300,000 to $350,000 short. And I know we kind of brainstormed a lot of options, and Faith, you probably might want to help me on this one, because one of the options I know was there was like $225,000 that we were going to be transferring, and I guess Faith, if you could help me out on that.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
So the $225,000 was going to be transferred into general fund. I gave you a worksheet that gave you a chance to do different on the property tax. We were going to ask for $450,000. That is what the original and what we have been looking at, $450,000 from the county for property tax increase. If you would take the 2020 growth, which is 1.7%, that would give you 685,000. So that would give you 235,000. So the 225, we could just not take that out of capital improvements and put it into general fund. Then they would have pretty close to what they were off as far as the capital improvement. And then you would have $10,000 that you would have to decide what to do with in the general fund if you chose to go that direction. And like I said, I did give you other options. If you took the next level of growth, you would get 275,000, and then of course if you took the third level, took everything you could, it would be the 370,000 plus the 450.
So the three different levels are 225.
275 and 370,
Which affects
and plus the 450. You know what I mean?
what
Yeah.
we already had with that.
Correct.
Yeah. Which affects the taxpayers.
Correct.
Because it's taking growth.
Yeah, your mill levy would be 7.43, 8.63, or 11.63. Or if you just did CPI and estimated growth, that would be 5.73, and that would give you 185,000. So there are some choices.
Yeah, and like anything, when you're forecasting, what the cost for these projects are, there's a certain amount of guesstimate in there. Rick has worked this for a long time, and, I'm pretty confident with a lot of his numbers, but again, it is an estimate. Could be short, could be long. We understand, all of us up here, that sometimes, there's needs, but you have to also have means to take care of those needs. And so I would recommend at least that 225 level. That would plus us up. That would get us close to what we think kind of the minimum to take care of for 2024. And a lot of that money, not a lot, but a chunk of the money for capital improvement is kind of tied up in matching for grants and loans and those things we want, because we're getting, some benefit from either the state or the federal government, and they're paid a big chunk of it to be able to take care of that stuff. And then we have some internal projects, leaks on roofs and things that, you could put a Band-Aid on it right now, but, it's just going to create bigger problems and bigger cost later on. So it probably makes sense to be able to take care of those things in 2024. And again, once we get into the capital improvements, I can give you a little more details on that. But overall, just kind of looking at what we thought the bare minimum for 2024, we were that 300,000 short. And again, that's a guesstimate. So if we can get that 225, at least we're getting pretty close and feeling comfortable that we can kind of take care of what the essential needs are for 2024.
Appreciate that, Aaron. Any other items council wants to bring up as consideration for changes from the proposed appropriation?
I'd like to just make a couple comments.
Go ahead, Kevin. Yeah.
First off, I'd like to commend the Finance Office for publishing an itemized budget for the first time in over a decade. That provides the information that everyone needs to see, not just the bottom line for each department, but, the individual spend items that are in there. There's a couple items, though, that, as we work through some of these previous reports and whatnot, have brought up, some questions about where we're even at as far as being responsible to the line item in our 24 budget. For example, in overtime in 2022, we had an overtime budget of $235,745, but we actually spent $695.46. We overspent our overtime by $459,000. We didn't budget much better for 23, which is kind of interesting because it was our overtime budget was $240,000, and the excuse that have been provided is that's how a former employee was actually running things. This 24 proposed budget that we're considering first reading on has $390,807 of overtime in it, $390,877. But our burn rate to date, through the end of July, so 7 months, excluding our biggest overtime month, rally, is right at 290,000. So it sure looks like we have not budgeted enough. And when you go through some of those individual line items, example, and this is no disrespect to any department, you know, we've got 180 in ambulance, but they spent 240 in 22. We've got 128 in the police overtime budget, but the 22 spend was 246,000. Sanitation, we spent 130,000 in overtime, but we've only got 14,500. So I'm not sure how we can balance out our budget and be responsible to the line item. I mean, there's many others that are, you know, have discrepancies as well, and I'm not professing that I understand every piece of this. I'm just asking the questions. As a counselor, there's very few things that I can do from the dais. I can vote on agenda items and I can ask questions, and I guess this is an important question to ask. Additionally, it's my understanding we took all the publishing out of all of the other departments and put it into one budget under mayor and council. Our 22 amount in the first reading budget ordinance is 38,800, but our actual spend in 22 was 56,000. And we've even been talking about making some enhancements with, you know, some of our publishings with, you know, our monthly SIP and things like that. So it seems like we're missing the mark with being responsible, and I'm not saying that as a negative thing, but I think it requires us to maybe be more diligent for the end of 23 and as the start of 24 to lead us to good information to use to be responsible for each individual line item, rather than having bottom line budgeting. And bottom line budgeting is, you know, a way that we survive when we're upside down. But if we're not trying to be responsible to the line item, we end up with padded budgets.
Lisa or Faye, do you want to speak to the overtime plans for this 24 appropriation and how those numbers were arrived to? And I think the publishing side of it is mostly the SIP, and then also a partnership with some other prints, I think. But I think the major one is the SIP, which Lisa probably has that information too. Because, all right, it's amazing we stumped her. But the overtime discussion is...
Yeah, with regards to the overtime, I mean, that is developed in each individual department. So they're looking at the needs of their department and trying to forecast what they think their needs are going to be for the department. I can't specifically speak to like one versus the other, but that's the approach that they take. Is they, you know, they're looking at, you know, how many hours, what has been my past utilization. I know in a lot of departments there has been concerted efforts in changing and scheduling to reduce overtime as much as we possibly can. You know, in sanitation, they have to pick up garbage on the weekend. That unfortunately is a 7-day-a-week type thing. Law enforcement, the police department is going to be subject to what kinds of call volume they have, you know, that we can't not respond. So there is some of that you can't budget for a busy week, as well as the rally. But they do try and develop those based on needs of the department and hours. So I really don't have an answer. That's kind of the process that they use, but I can't specifically speak to, you know, a particular department and why it might have been over or under for a particular year.
I think the talking point is we don't really know, and we've made some changes because of how budgeting was previously done.
Yes.
I mean, we've been trying to adjust things and be
make
more
it more accurate.
responsible,
Yeah,
and
absolutely,
that's commendable. I think what it's going to take, though, to tighten that up so that everyone understands is monthly reporting or key performance indicators on our overtime, so we know the months that we're spending in the departments that they're being spent in, because out of our payroll, you know, $700,000 is a heck of a lot of overtime
You also have to remember that in some departments, when you are running short, you will have to pay overtime. So if we have a department that's maybe recruiting for someone right now, they might have more overtime, but then they're going to be off on the wages as well. So there is some of that when you are down, you're relying on a smaller crew, and so therefore the overtime might be higher in that department on a temporary basis. But the overall, when you look at wages that were not paid straight wages because we didn't have the third, fifth, seventh person, that could skew it as well. So it's hard to just look at overtime given there are a lot of moving parts in that.
Well, we should be able to clarify that with good reporting as we go forward here.
Recommendation as we get into the 25 process, and I know that we've kind of talked about that here on the dais about maybe doing some of these actions sooner and getting the council more involved in some discussions with the department heads, public budget hearings. But as we start to look at 2025 budget, we're still kind of looking at the execution, what our execution rate is for 2024, and then we're looking at what we actually spend in 23, 22, maybe 21. And I know each year sometime has its own uniqueness, in terms of what happened. So that's going to fluctuate over time and salaries and other things within the budget. But as you look over the last 3 years, you start to see a pattern in terms of kind of the average. And so as we start looking at 2025, maybe look at what those execution averages are for the last 3 years to help inform what we anticipate it might be in 2025. Again, you're never going to get it perfect, but I do think that might help us get closer. And so as we're making the adjustments, they're smaller adjustments than what we have been doing. So just kind of looking at what our execution has been and helping forming what we think the execution be for that next year. But again, I do think when we get into 2025, and based on some of the discussions we've had, I know that Becca and I have talked about, and she chairperson for the legal and finance, there are some things we can do to be able to set those conditions for 2025.
Yep, and if the council wants that information, those are easier reports to run out of our financial system to say, here's the 3 years or 5 years or whatever time period you guys want to look at.
Thanks, Lisa.
And truly on the police, and not to, like you said, pick on them or anything, but this is something that goes way back to Jim Bush and goes back at least 16 years since I've been there. They're always, the wages are higher, the overtime is lower, but they always shift themselves so you're not over. So like in 2022, there was $183,000 worth of wages left over, but there was $118,000 of overtime used over the amount budgeted. That has just been call it a Jim Bush thing, I guess. I think it's been going on since Jim, and Jody pretty much carried that on. Yes, and I'm sure he's not going to appreciate that at all.
Well, and I think the point is the fact that
It's still bottom line, and I know you hate bottom line, but that's what the auditors are looking at is did we spend over the bottom line? They don't ever look at the line items.
and that was the point I wanted to make, is that when the overtime is exceeded on the budget, quite often on the wage side of it, it balances it out.
Correct.
Therefore, there isn't supplemental appropriations done through that department to say we have to pay the wages at the end, at a certain point. So it is a tough guess, but I think moving forward, there's opportunities to get it dialed in tighter, without a doubt.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because you can look at the police department, and Kevin kind of threw out those figures. I think it was 128 that we've budgeted for the last 4 years. But each of those 4 years, we've gone over that amount, and I think our execution rate for 2023 is going to go over that amount. So we know that 128 is probably, not the right number. So, and again, I don't think you're going to get it perfect. I mean, you're making assumptions, and but again, having those budget updates, as Councilor Forster was talking about, would help us as we're going through that. We start to understand what those execution rates are, and then at some point, then we'll have to be able to have a supplement to be able to adjust that or do something internal. But at least we kind of see that, with our headlights out, and we can see it coming versus just waiting for it to happen.
Other discussions? So back to the beginning discussion of, we had some questions, and I believe we've discussed those. considerations for changes from the proposed appropriation ordinance that was brought forward within the packet, and then the real consideration of if we take any growth or past growth, or, I mean, there's a wide range of funds that would bring different amounts of money to this next year's budget through the property taxes, so we have to consider all those. So any further discussion on those options, I think, is something we should hash out here. Aaron did tee it up with the fact that he felt from his point of view that taking just the growth from the county for this upcoming year, the 1.7, I think it is, which gives us the 225,000. 235, yep.
That would help cover the capital
CIP, yep.
improvement plan that we have, shortfalls.
Yep.
You know, everybody needs to be cognizant that, you know, I think it'll be next meeting that we're going to be revisiting our utility rates, is it not?
Hopefully, if not, the first meeting in October.
You know, we're definitely going to be, from the preliminary information, seeing some rate increases on the base rates and a new surcharge that's no small amount of money that, you know, will affect our residents.
Yes, because this budget is based on the 5% and the surcharge. New surcharge.
Along with that consideration, there's been discussion of the additional 4,500, which would have to be figured in.
And you have that 10,000, so I don't know if you want to take part of that and then put something, that other part to ambulance, the money that goes from general fund to ambulance. You can put it back and reduce the cash on hand at the end of the year. So that would reduce that by $5,500 instead of, let me, I never can find that number. Yeah, right. Right now, the cash on hand is $162,758. So then you would reduce that by $5,500. So that's just saying at the end of the year, we're going to have that $162,000.
Right. Heavy lift here, but any other discussion on?
You know, just guess another comment, and you know, obviously what Councilor Forster talked about. You know, anytime we do some kind of stuff, there's going to be a direct, you know, impact. If you're talking about surcharges, you're talking about, you know, even if it's just a small change in property tax. I mean, that somebody has to pay that. I guess if I'm looking at this problem strategically, when you talk about infrastructure, if you look at what we've had coming in on capital improvements and what we, you know, part of those enterprise fronts too, to help out of its water, wastewater, if it's specific to those kind of projects. And if you look at current projects, you look at projects that we've already planned that haven't executed, and then you start looking at, even within the 5 years, you know, other projects along Lozelle Street, Junction Street. If you add all that stuff up, that well exceeds what we have coming in. And so, you know, the one thing that we brainstormed in our last committee is that, and granted, I don't think we need to solve that today, but it's just more of a conversation about, because if you don't raise anything now, you know, the problem doesn't go away in terms of the infrastructure. Either it's end of life or it's an emergency type thing. It might be a quality of life, it might be a compliance, you know, type of situation. And so it just continues to kind of push that can down around a little bit. But at some point, we're going to have to be able to, you know, to be able to execute those projects, and those projects will take, you know, means of finance to be able to do that. So that's, you know, again, that's where I was looking at it from a big picture. This year, we know that, you know, there's projects that we've had on the books that we're going to recommend that we don't do this year because we just can't afford to do it, or even next year. And maybe have to look at other means of finance for those kind of projects, some of those larger, high-dollar projects. But it's the routine stuff, and like the resurfacing. We got to start working on some of the alleyways, you know, like we said, some of the internal infrastructure, and then just some of these projects and the quality of life and stuff. You know, at some point, we're just going to have to really kind of look at, you know, do we continue to put, you know, Band-Aid's probably not the right word to use, Because it's not nothing to be a negative. I know that we're always trying to find a balance between, maintaining things affordability, but also kind of maintaining, a basic standard when it comes down to infrastructure. And just trying to find that is always somewhat challenging. But the longer you go with infrastructure, the more, that problem of infrastructure of having to be addressed increases. Just like we talked about, a car. You can have a car for, 5 years works great. In the next 5 years, you got to put a lot of money into preventive maintenance, or you got to fix problems. And so we have a lot of those kind of things in infrastructure that are not maybe at the end of life, but they're getting close to the end of life, or we have a lot of developments going on in Sturgis, and the current, particularly streets infrastructure and intersection infrastructure, doesn't necessarily kind of fit what that development's going to be when it comes down to public safety and efficiency and those type of things. And so we know that in 5 years or so, those things are going to be around. And so we either got to, start saving money to be able to pay for those things and put stuff aside, or we have to start looking at what our finance means are going to be and preparing for that, that 4 to 5 years. So again, I do thank Faye, Lisa, and Adam, really for educating me. I probably didn't explain it as well as you explained it to me, but, and they understand this. We all kind of sat there and we understand it. We got this in front of us, but we also have, at the end of the day, limited means to take care of it all.
Anything else from council or the public?
Mr. Mayor.
Go ahead, Becca.
So I think that, for me, it comes down to competing interests and always trying to find the balance. As someone who leans more towards kind of the right of the spectrum, raising taxes, my reaction initially is, no, I cannot support that, because it would be an increase in the mill levy. But then you run that up against the problem of deferred maintenance. And I think that we've all seen the issues that putting a project off can cause. We see it on the federal level, we see it on the state level, and I think deferred maintenance will affect quality of life. And so I'm glad to see as a council, we are looking, we're expanding the headlights. We're going to start taking, the multi-year look at projects that will be coming down. I think that we're going to have a greater focus on that. So to be frank, this is a tough decision. I think that you have to look at the economic factors that our, community and our country we're facing. This isn't a decision, that I'm making lightly. I don't think any of us are. When we're looking at having to raise fees and raise taxes, it's really tough. But I think, I have to be pragmatic about the question of, is it an irresponsible stance to not repair streets, to not look forward as far as infrastructure that we're going to be needing because of our growth? We always want growth to be happening in our community, but we also have to remember that the counterbalance to that is increased costs and building out that infrastructure. So all of that to just say this is a really tough decision. And
Mayor, I'd like to just add one other thing. We can always, Municipal League is looking again at that 1 cent tax again, to where if we had capital, it'd be strictly for capital improvements. It would be something that we would go to an election for, but it would be for capital improvements. So I think if we can push that, maybe could get it through, that would help us in the long run, in the future, we would think.
There would be a different revenue stream for sure.
It would be, yeah.
And Sturgis is in the unique opportunity where we have a high amount of outside visitors, so proportionally our residents would pay less for very large projects. the other key thing to that situation and what makes it make so much sense, it's specific to each project. So it sunsets and disappears once the project's funded and complete. But that is something that hasn't occurred yet, but would certainly create a revenue stream that would make Sturgis
Well, if they
planning
get
a lot
it,
easier.
if they get the bill, we need to fight for it in February.
We do
need
for
to
sure.
fight hard.
And we've gotten close here. We're getting closer each time we try, so. Well, basically, it's a bill brought forward in the past that brings the opportunity for projects to be paid for by an additional 1% tax on all purchases within a municipality, which means for every dollar our citizens would spend, they would have to spend another penny. But it is specific to those projects, and it's a specific amount. And once that amount is done, that extra penny disappears per dollar. And then because it's voted for that the community wants this project, and we're going to pay for it through the extra penny. So it's unique, but a revenue stream that would be beneficial to our municipality for sure.
From a tourist town perspective, you have a lot of other people helping us pay for that project.
That's exactly the key right there. Is it's our visitors help pay for that project within our community. So, but that doesn't answer our question for appropriations tonight, unfortunately. Any other discussion?
I just want to caveat off of Aaron a little bit. As we look at the potential increase in fees, is a fee on services, water, sewer. We don't control electricity, so that's not an issue. But streets, all the infrastructure elements are going to have to raise. And that is because our population is growing. I've been on the council for a long time, over a decade now. And when I first got on the council, we had almost zero growth. Nobody was moving in, we weren't building new homes. That's all changed. That's done a 180 in the last decade. And as we get more growth, we have a requirement to increase our infrastructure all the way around. That's larger sewer mains, extension of sewers, extension of water, extension of streets, and then, the traveled byways need to be shored up and reinitialized for the amount of growth that just for streets and roads. We're in a tremendous growth period right now, and it's not going to get any cheaper. So the city's going to see an increase in serviceability fees, and hopefully we can spread it around enough that it's not a burden to any one particular area of the city. Anyway, if we don't do this, we're going to be in serious trouble. That's just a personal opinion, but I think it's been well put together by the Infrastructure Committee. I thank Aaron. He's done a tremendous job of capturing all the information. And I, for one, feel a lot better with what's going to come because of that. There's a lot of research, a lot of justification, and a lot of planning done by Mr. Bush and the Infrastructure Committee. What's coming is going to be required for our future. If we want to grow, if we want to get bigger, if we want a bigger business, if we want major businesses to come to town, we need to be ready to grow it. And this is the first step in growing the new infrastructure for business. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Any other discussion? Public or council? Anybody willing to make a motion after that discussion? It's a lot of data, a lot of information.
What do you need for a motion, Faye?
we need to decide if, what you're going to, want for property tax. So that's the main thing. Right now, we're asking for 450,000 more than last year. If you want to pay for that or take that capital improvement, so they're not giving general fund money, you would go with the full 2024 growth in CPI plus 1 year of growth that we have banked. And that would make the mill levy at 7.43, and that would give us $235,000. And so then capital improvements would not be giving money to general fund, and that would give them more money to come closer to what the 2024 capital improvements are. And then there's $10,000 that you'd have to decide what to do with, which there's been one recommendation of another $4,500 to the police for that tactical. And then that would leave $5,500 to decide what to do with.
To whether to put back in the general fund or to return as cash on hand, you're saying?
You can do that, yep, or
Can we briefly talk about the stored growth?
Sure.
That's 3 years, correct?
that is, 1.7 3 years ago, 1.2 2 years ago, and 3% 3 years ago.
And how much of that stored growth are you proposing to?
The 1.7, that's the one that drops off if we don't use it.
And is that the amount, though?
1.7% is what we can go up. So the CPI for 2024 is 3%. The estimated growth is 2.73. That's still estimated because the utilities are not in that. So we're probably going to be lower. We probably could ask for more, but the utilities isn't in that. But then the 1.7 would be included on that, which would be 7.43% is what would ask for, which would give us another $235,000.
So what I'm hearing is there's no way out of this without increasing.
If you want to leave capital improvements doing what it's doing right now, and they'll be down money, you could leave it the way it is now, Mike, if you wanted to, with just asking for the 450,000, and that would keep your mill levy just about even. But then, like I said, you're not doing anything for capital improvements.
Now is anybody willing to make a motion?
No, it's worse.
I might need some help on this. But I guess the motion I would like to make is that we would, out of that 10,000, allocate 4,500 to the tactical response force to be able to get the equipment so they can start the training. And then that other 5,500 maybe back to the general fund. And then I understand, and I really appreciate what Becca said about finding a balance. I would rather, from a capital improvements, part of the motion then is to do the actions to get the additional, I think it was 235 now, to get to 235. And I know it's a little bit of an increase, but it's not a significant increase. And then I guess along with what's already in the budget, I guess I'm not sure if this would be part of the motion, but I wouldn't mind tying this just to ensure that we're all on the same sheet of music about the 2025 process. I know that's Beck and I have already started working that, and I guess from the council, just everybody be on board with, the bottom line is just start the process early and make sure that we're involved in it, understand it much sooner. So we're not to this point in the year, getting close. We got to get a first reading, a second reading done. We'll have that done much earlier with a lot more information. And then also just some oversights on maybe a budget process for 2024. So I know do you want me to try to recapture that?
I think we got it. I think it makes sense.
And Aaron, when you say to give back the 5,500, do you want to reduce the cash on hand? Well, we have to have cash on hand at the end.
Would you recommend that, Faye?
I mean, it's, I guess, yes.
Okay, then yes.
So we got a first by Aaron. Yes.
May I have permission
This summer,
state what I believe Councilor
please.
Jordan has just suggested?
He was asking for that.
And that would be
Get closer to your microphone, please.
a motion to take the deferred growth of 1.7%, allocate the increase from taking that deferred growth to cover the capital improvements budget shortfall, number one. Number two, to pay the police tactical training amount of $4,500, and three, to divert the other $5,500 to cash reserves. Does that capture the essence of your motion?
Yes, thanks, Mark.
We have a first on the floor.
I'll second that.
We got a second by Mike. Any last discussion?
So it will be 235.
Correct, yep. None being heard, we'll go ahead and roll call this ordinance. I'll start with myself. I am yes. Becca?
Yes.
Dean?
Yes.
Aaron?
Yes.
Preston?
Yes.
Angela?
Yes.
Kevin?
Yes.
Tony?
Yes.
And Mike?
Yes.
First reading passes with the motion as stated. Brings us to item 9.3, which is discussion regarding American Flat Trackers and the progressive site visit next week. And Lance is ready to roll. I'll turn it over to you.
Council. The report I have before you this evening is in regard to the city's announcement during the 2022 post-rally summit last October. That consideration would be given to returning the tradition of sanctioned motorcycle racing during the upcoming years of the City of Sturgis Motorcycle Rally, specifically to legendary Main Street. Given this challenge, the months since have been dedicated to identifying and contacting race industry professionals and organizations, attending applicable racing events, obtaining insight and knowledge, and to forming the partnerships required for the city's success. As a first step in this process and to gain relevant experience, the city was proud to participate in the 2023 Progressive American Flat Track Championship Series as the title sponsor of Round 15, that being the City of Sturgis Black Hills Half Mile, held in Rapid City during the 83rd anniversary rally. Building on the success of this race sponsorship, the next step of our consideration will be the city's hosting of AMA pro racing staff in conjunction with the Outer Kind Agency, September 11th and 12th in Sturgis. During this site visit, AMA Pro Racing will conduct controlled road tests, riding city streets both in and adjacent to the downtown corridor. In addition, working meetings with city leadership and cognizant department staff will be held, including introductory meetings with local business stakeholders and organizations as scheduling permits. The objective of this site visit is to further the vision of a Sturgis street race by assessing potential race course routes and locations for ancillary and support activities, attendee viewing opportunities, and identification of safety and environmental concerns, and the collecting of stakeholder inputs. This information will be used to create a comprehensive race event proposal for the City Council's consideration, providing a basis to assess feasibility and a platform for public input and discussion, should moving forward with such an event be deemed a realistic option. City staff will participate in and assist with all aspects of the planned site visit, including the road testing, to minimize any related inconveniences
and to ensure the safety of our residents, visitors, and associated properties, while gaining the most benefit from this visit. The anticipated budget impact is not to exceed $11,000 for travel expenses shared with AMA Pro Racing and Outer Kind, and also our staff time. Are there any questions? Excuse me.
Does council have any questions?
So the 11,000 includes all of our staff time investment?
That, Councilor Forrester, that is entirely the travel-related budget.
That's entirely travel, so.
That is.
When we itemize the rest, we'll have a little bit bigger spend in that, so to speak.
That's correct, yeah.
Lance, in your opinion, I guess just give us a brief benefit of this partnership.
Certainly. I think bringing this type of activity, potential activity, to the city during the rally, especially that last weekend, certainly we hope would have the possibility to greatly increase our attendance that final weekend, and possibly even bring in a younger or a different demographic to our event, the rally.
I have a concern. What's the increased workload for Public Works? Can we calculate that in any way, shape, or form?
Councilor Bashan, I believe that what will come out of this site visit will be an estimation of what that would be and what impact from an outer agency or an outer group to do those things that we simply don't have the time to do internally. That will all be assessed and evaluated.
Thank you.
So I understand that historically, obviously, there have been races and there are other things that happen in other areas of the city as far as the rally. When was the last time there was a race directly promoted by the city for the rally?
I believe at the fairgrounds, maybe 6-7 years ago.
Well, the Spirit of Sturgis is what it was referred to at the fairgrounds, was a partnership, but not solely the city. It is mostly carried by others.
It's been a long, long time since, to answer your question, from a pure city perspective, it's been a long, long time, decades, since the city of Sturgis itself was a promoter.
Have we ever been the sole promoter
Not
of an event like that?
Well, we've been a promoter, yes, but that was for a downtown Main Street race. It is within the last 9 years, we did two or three of those.
You're talking supermoto. Mm-hmm. Yep. But during the rally.
Right.
But nothing during the rally.
Correct.
So, to my knowledge, nothing ever during the rally.
Lance, what is the format on this? Is it supermoto or is it just street race, asphalt only? Or is there gonna have to, is it a supermoto race where they're gonna bring in dirt and all that fun stuff too?
That's part of what will be determined with the site visit.
Is there any
what
way
would
you
make
can
the
get
most
us all
sense.
a schedule of that 11th and 12th visit? Because I'd definitely like to be on it because I see very, very big concerns in this. So I'd personally like to be in on it and see what this is going to consist of.
Certainly, and we appreciate everyone's inputs on this.
It's a hard talking point, especially when we just didn't argue, but heavily discussed $4,500 to make sure that our citizens were safe and, our police had the equipment that they need. And, we have lots of other need. I brought up previously that I have not seen that we have followed our comprehensive plan and really tried to diversify in too many directions. I mean, we try and do some little events, but, not really seeing that we're promoting our community for anything other than rally. With that, this has been a thing that has been discussed now for 2 years. It came out in the post-rally of 22. It did not happen at the 23 rally, and this would give us the tools to make a final decision to decide whether or not this was a positive thing to move with, or it was something that was not going to benefit the community enough for us to proceed. And so with that, I guess I would support the $11,000 and make the motion that we spend that this year.
And just to let you know, that 11,000 was not on the claims. It had not been turned in, so this would be approving the claim.
Up to 11,000 out of the sponsorship budget, and all of the extra expenses be tracked.
I'll second that, but not an exception. I believe that we need council representation. I'd like to see us all get involved in this, but without calling a special meeting for the 11th and 12th, I don't know how to do that. So at least we need the chairman of all those committees to be part of this. Infrastructure, rally and events, legal and finance. You know, I don't get around well, so somebody could have my seat, but we need good council representation, consistent all the way through this process, so the rest of us can make an informed decision. And I think this could be a big deal for the city of Sturgis. I think it could be a tremendous revenue generator. I'd kind of like to see it off year from the rally, but the draw is the rally. So we'll see what the committee comes up with.
We got a first and a second on the floor to approve travel expenses up to $11,000. Any last discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please indicate by stating yes.
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 Opposed to no. That motion carries.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lance. Item 10 is other matters that come before the council. Opportunity for council members or the public to bring up non-agenda items. Starting the public tonight. How about council? Anything to add?
Mr. Mayor, I do have one.
Yeah, go
item. You know, next year we're doing our city elections, you know, for those that are up on the council. Typically, as I understand, we do that in April, and then we kind of seat the new councilors in May. I know the South Dakota Municipality League had suggested to all the cities maybe to change that to fit along with your counties, or and we had talked about that. You know, and that would be, I think, Kevin, when's the county election cycle?
It's
June is the primary?
June the primary, yep.
And that's when the school board also.
You're correct.
Right. So at some point, we need to make, if we want to make that change, I think we need to make that decision relatively soon, because we're only right around the corner for that to happen. So either we're going to stay consistent with what we've been doing, or we'll make that change. As I understand it, the intent of that change was just to be able to maximize turnout. And so you'd have you'd have all people come in to do both city and county, and hopefully you'd have more people that would participate.
And have the one election versus two, which takes twice the mobilization for sure.
Right. So I know we've talked about it, but I wouldn't mind, I know no action necessary tonight, but I do think we need to put that on the agenda sometime in the near future so we can have a discussion, make a decision, and move forward.
Appreciate you teeing that up, Aaron.
Yes, I was going to bring that up because that will need to be changed by ordinance, and then in January is when, and then we
the
need to
deadline
have
is.
an agreement with the county. So kind of a couple steps there that we have to do because January is when we definitely get started getting them petitions.
I think that has a multitude of benefit all the way around. It should have been like that forever.
Well, it won't work every cycle because the county only has an election every 2 years, and we're on 3-year cycles, so we'll occasionally be off.
School in the city, yep.
May I consider this as a direction to propose an amended ordinance for council's consideration in the very near future?
I think it's fair to bring it forward for discussion, for sure. As our ordinance process includes a discussion step, first reading and second reading.
I think we also need to reach out to the Meade County Auditor to make sure that they're willing to absorb that election piece as well.
Yeah, with Helen being there, not Lisa. I know I've talked to Lisa about it, when she was there, so, and it will probably double your cost, but it'll be worth it, I think, getting more people out.
It changes the way it's counted,
Yep.
for one.
Yep.
And we have an election board or an election counting board
Correct,
that
which
is put
costs,
in
yeah.
place, which we could then remove. So lot of meat to chew on, I guess, with it, but all sensible discussions for sure. Anything else for other matters?
Mr. Mayor?
Yep.
I pulled up the council goals and objectives document that former city manager Ainsley discussed back in March. And I've got a couple of questions about where we're at on that, what some of our progress has been, and even, I guess it's 6 months later, but one of the items, item 14, published city fee schedule for all departments and uses, says it's complete, but I don't see that on our website. So could we have a status update on our goals and objectives that the council approved in the fall of 22?
You want that in a city council meeting, or?
I think since we approved the goals in a city council meeting, it would be prudent to go
Apropos.
ahead and have the discussion in open session about what we've accomplished on that list of goals
I agree.
publicly.
Informational reports in the future.
It just leads to transparency.
Yep. Lisa's coming to add.
The transition team has updated that spreadsheet. I think it's just pending being submitted out to you guys, but the document has been completed and updated. I mean, it's not complete, but it's updated.
And we can include that in the near future and informational reports on the council meeting. Yep. Yep, beforehand. Anything else for other matters? Bonnie, what do you have? Come. Go ahead. What'd you have, Bonnie? What?
Just an update on our city manager.
Still working on that process for the hiring of a city manager. Been through some different layers of interviews. As we get further traction, we'll let people know as where we're at in the process, but still in the interview process. Anything else for other matters? I do know we have a request for executive session. I guess we can clarify on if it's the true numbers with 2 for personnel, 4 for legal, and 2 for contracts, Mr. Marshall.
That's correct,
And then
Mr.
1
Mayor.
for marketing, too. No action anticipated other than what's stated on the agenda.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Is there a motion for executive session?
Mr. Mayor, I'll move to approve or motion for executive session.
We got a first by Dean,
Second.
second by Aaron. All those in favor to go into exec, please indicate by stating yes.
Yes.
Opposed to no. We're in exec. I think it's probably All right, we're back in regular session. Last item is to adjourn. Is there a motion?
Motion?
First by Aaron,
I'll second it.
second by Tony. All those in favor of the motion to adjourn, please indicate by stating yes.
Yes.
Opposed to no. We're adjourned.